The winter storm hammered the Maine coastline with a fury locals hadn't seen in 2 decades. Connor Hayes pulled the heavy oak door of Hayes Woodworks against the howling wind, snow already piling against the threshold in drifts that would reach his knees by morning. The workshop had stood here since 1947, built by his grandfather with timber from ships broken apart in these very waters, and it had weathered worse than this. At least that's what Connor told himself as he checked the locks one final time, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Through the frost-crusted windows, headlights suddenly swept across the workshop floor. A white SUV skidded into the gravel lot, engine sputtering, fishtailing on black ice before jerking to a stop 15 feet from the entrance. Connor's hand instinctively moved to the steel pry bar hanging by the door. Old Navy habits died hard. But he paused when the driver's door flew open and a woman stumbled out, clutching a small child against her chest. Both were shaking violently, their designer clothes no match for the Arctic blast tearing through the harbor town. Connor shoved the door open, wind nearly ripping it from his hinges. The woman's eyes met his for a fraction of a second. Terror beneath a mask of composure, the particular kind of fear that came from running not from something, but from someone. Her lips moved, words swallowed by the storm, and then her knees buckled. Connor caught her before she hit the ice, the child still locked in her arms, both of them lighter than they should be, as if they'd been running on nothing but adrenaline for days. Sometimes the storm brings exactly who you're meant to save. Connor Hayes had learned long ago that life rarely followed the plans you made for it. 5 years had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there when Emily was alive, when their biggest worry was whether Noah would sleep through the night or wake them at 3 a.m. asking about dinosaurs. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The diagnosis had come too late for treatment to matter. 18 months from the doctor's pronouncement to the funeral, 18 months of watching the strongest person he'd ever known fade into someone he barely recognized. The medical bills had been crushing. $340,000, itemized in statements that still arrived occasionally, forwarded from collection agencies that didn't care she was gone. Connor had taken a second mortgage on the building, borrowed $60,000 from friends who'd shown up to Emily's fundraisers, and left checks they couldn't afford. He'd worked 16-hour days in the months after, taking every custom furniture commission that came through, not because he needed to stay busy, though that was part of it, but because the alternative was sitting in the apartment upstairs, remembering what it felt like when she was still there. Noah had been 5 when it happened. Now he was 10, old enough to remember his mother, but young enough that those memories were already starting to blur at the edges, replaced by stories Connor told him at bedtime about Emily's laugh, about how she could burn water but somehow made the best chocolate chip cookies in 3 counties. The boy was too serious for his age, too careful, too aware that the universe could take away the people you loved without warning. Connor carried the woman and child into the workshop, kicking the door shut behind him. The heat from the wood stove in the corner barely reached this far, but it was better than outside where the wind chill had already dropped below 0. He set them down carefully on the worn leather couch he kept for clients, the woman's designer coat soaked through, the child's face buried in her mother's shoulder. The little girl couldn't have been more than 7, dark hair plastered to her skull, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then locked onto Connor's face with sudden panic. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. Please hide us. He's coming." Then her eyes rolled back, and she was out again, body going slack against the cushions. The little girl whimpered, trying to shake her mother awake, and Connor's chest tightened with a familiar ache. Connor grabbed the emergency blanket from the cabinet and wrapped it around both of them. The child flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away, too cold to refuse help. He checked the woman's pulse, steady, just exhausted, and noticed the bruises on her wrists. faint yellow-green marks that spoke of fingers gripping too hard, too often. The SUV outside was still running, exhaust visible in the swirling snow. Massachusetts plates. Expensive vehicle, the kind that cost more than Connor made in a year. He walked back to the window and peered out, checking for other cars, other headlights, but saw nothing except the storm. Whoever she was running from wasn't here yet. Yet. Connor climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above the workshop, each step creaking its familiar protest. Noah was stretched out on the couch, already in his pajamas, nose buried in one of those mystery novels where kids solved crimes and saved the day. The kid had learned to read him too well, could tell the difference between regular tired and something's wrong tired. Connor kept his voice level. "We have guests, a woman and her daughter. They need shelter from the storm." Noah sat up straighter, book forgotten. "Are they okay?" Connor crossed to the linen closet and pulled out extra blankets, towels, dry clothes that might fit. "They will be. But I need you to be polite and not ask too many questions, all right? Sometimes people need help, and they don't want to talk about why." Noah nodded solemnly, then slipped off the couch and padded to his room. He returned a moment later with the blanket Emily had crocheted during her first round of chemotherapy, the one with uneven stitches and irregular patterns because her hands had started shaking. It was Noah's most precious possession, the thing he slept with every night, and now he was holding it out to Connor. Connor's throat constricted. "You sure, bud?" Noah's jaw set with determination. "She's probably scared. This always makes me feel better when I'm scared." They brought the supplies down together. The woman had regained consciousness, sitting upright now with the child tucked against her, both of them still wrapped in the emergency blanket. She tracked their movement with eyes that missed nothing, cataloging exits and distances with the precision of someone who'd had to run before. Connor set the clothes on the arm of the couch. "There's a bathroom through that door. Hot water should last about 20 minutes. Take what you need." The woman's voice was stronger now, controlled, the kind of voice used to giving orders in boardrooms. "Thank you. We'll be gone as soon as the storm passes." Noah stepped forward, that precious blanket clutched in both hands. "You can use this." His voice came out smaller than usual, shy. "It's really warm." The little girl's eyes went wide at the sight of another child, someone her own age. She reached out one small hand and touched the blanket, testing its softness, then looked up at her mother with a question in her eyes. The woman's composure cracked just slightly, moisture gathering at the corners of her eyes before she blinked it away. "That's very kind of you." Noah helped the little girl unwrap from the emergency blanket and transferred Emily's crocheted one around her shoulders instead. The girl pulled it close, burying her nose in the yarn, and for the first time since arriving, some of the tension left her small body. Connor led them upstairs while Noah stayed behind to gather the wet clothes and hang them by the wood stove to dry. The apartment radiated warmth from the cast-iron stove that had heated this space for 3 generations. The woman stood in the center of the living room, taking in details, exits, windows, sight lines. Her designer heels clicked against the worn floorboards, shoes meant for city sidewalks, not ice and snow. Connor gestured toward the bathroom. "Clean towels in the cabinet. There's a robe that might fit you, and I can probably find something for your daughter." He paused. "What's her name?" The woman hesitated, calculating risk versus humanity. "Lily. And I'm Diana." First names only. No last names offered, no context, no explanation. Connor understood boundaries. "Connor Hayes. My son is Noah." Diana's hand moved to her coat pocket, checking for something, and Connor caught a glimpse of a phone screen. No signal, no bars, the storm having knocked out the cell towers. She pulled her hand back quickly, caught. Connor nodded toward the window. "Storm took out the towers about an hour ago. Sometimes we get a bar or two if you stand in the northeast corner of the bedroom, but it's spotty at best." Diana's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, tension releasing before snapping back into place. How long do these storms usually last? Connor had lived here his whole life, except for his Navy years, had weathered countless nor'easters and blizzards. This one could be all night. Roads won't be passable until morning at the earliest, maybe longer if the plows can't get through. He watched Diana process that information, watched her calculate odds and options, and realize she had very few of either. Whatever she was running from would have to wait until the storm passed. Diana took Lily into the bathroom, and Connor heard the water start running. He returned downstairs to find Noah had not only hung the wet cloves, but had also started heating milk on the stove. The kid had learned to make hot chocolate during Emily's illness, had perfected the ratio of cocoa to sugar to milk, while his mother lay in bed too weak to do it herself. Connor ruffled Noah's hair. Good thinking. Noah concentrated on stirring the pot, not looking up. She looked cold and scared. They brought the hot chocolate upstairs just as Diana and Lily emerged from the bathroom, both of them wearing Connor's old Navy sweatshirts, too big on Diana, absolutely swimming on Lily, and wrapped in towels. Lily's hair had been combed out, hanging in damp, dark waves past her shoulders, and Diana had scrubbed the makeup from her face, revealing shadows under her eyes that spoke of weeks without proper sleep. Noah held out the mugs. I made hot chocolate. The good kind, with real chocolate, not the powder stuff. Lily looked at her mother for permission before accepting the mug in both small hands, blowing on it carefully before taking a sip. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise, pleasure, the first hint of something other than fear crossing her features. What struck Connor most was how quickly the children adapted to each other's presence, as if they recognized something kindred in one another. Within minutes, Noah had coaxed Lily over to the wood stove, showing her how to toast marshmallows over the open door, a winter tradition Emily had started years ago when the power would go out during storms. He demonstrated the technique with serious concentration, explaining the perfect distance to hold the stick, how to rotate it slowly for even browning, how to blow out the flame when it inevitably caught fire. Lily watched with intense focus, mimicking his movements exactly, and when her marshmallow achieved the perfect golden brown, her face lit up with pure joy. She looked back at Diana with that universal look of accomplishment, and Diana's controlled expression softened for just a moment. Noah offered Lily another marshmallow, then pulled out a battered deck of cards. Do you know how to play Go Fish? Lily shook her head, and Noah launched into an explanation of the rules with the patience of someone who'd spent a lot of time alone. They settled on the floor by the stove, cards spread between them, their voices creating a gentle background hum that filled the apartment with life in a way it hadn't felt in years. Connor brought Diana a mug of tea, and she accepted it with a small nod of acknowledgement. She perched on the edge of the worn leather sofa, posture rigid despite the warm environment, every muscle coiled as if ready to run at a moment's notice. She kept her phone in her hand, checking it obsessively even though she'd claimed it had no signal, the screen's light reflecting off her face in the dim room. He settled into the chair across from her, the same chair where he'd sat countless nights watching Emily sleep during her illness. Connor let the silence stretch, giving Diana space to speak, or not speak, whatever she needed. Diana's fingers wrapped around the mug, seeking warmth or comfort, or maybe just something solid to hold on to. You're not going to ask? It wasn't a question. Connor shrugged. Figure you'll tell me if you need to. Otherwise, it's none of my business. Diana's laugh held no humor, just a bitter understanding of how relative safety could be. I wish it were just the storm I was worried about. The children had moved to the window now, Noah pointing out where the harbor usually lay beyond the wall of white, describing the boats that would bob there in summer, the lobster traps stacked on the docks, the seals that sometimes hauled out on the rocks. Lily pressed her nose to the glass, leaving little fog circles that Noah turned into smiley faces with his finger, and for a moment, she was just a 7-year-old girl enjoying a snow day. Their joy stood in sharp contrast to the tension radiating from Diana's body, The way she kept positioning herself to see all exits, the way her hand occasionally moved to her pocket as if checking for something beyond just the phone. Lily's voice cut through the quiet, bright with wonder. "Mom, look!" Noah says sometimes you can see seals from here when it's not snowing. Real seals, not just the ones in the aquarium. Diana's voice softened for her daughter while her knuckles stayed white around the mug. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Connor recognized the signs of someone running from something more dangerous than weather. He'd seen it before in a neighbor who'd fled an abusive relationship, the way she'd jumped at doorbell rings for months afterward, the way Diana startled at every unexpected sound, how she positioned herself between Lily and the door, the careful way she chose her words as if they might be used against her later. All of it spoke of a fear that had nothing to do with the blizzard raging outside. As the evening deepened and the children began to yawn, their energy finally depleted, Connor made up the small guest room that had once been Emily's craft space. The walls still held faint marks from her design sketches, dreams of quilts she'd never finish. Diana tucked Lily in with a gentleness that revealed the fierce love beneath her polished exterior. Singing a lullaby so quietly, Connor could barely hear it from the hallway. When Diana returned to the living room, her shoulders finally began to drop, exhaustion winning its battle against hypervigilance. She sank into the sofa, and for the first time since arriving, she looked her age instead of 10 years older. Connor waited, the silence between them comfortable now. Diana's whisper cut through the quiet. "Thank you for not asking questions, for creating normalcy for Lily, for offering safety without conditions." The truth emerged slowly, like ice melting under warm water. Diana sat with her second cup of tea, the children asleep in their respective rooms, the storm creating a white noise buffer between them and the world that seemed increasingly dangerous with each detail she shared. Connor had learned patience in his years of working with wood. You couldn't rush the grain, couldn't force the joints, had to let the material tell you what it wanted to become. People were much the same. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. "He won't stop. My ex-husband, Marcus Thornton. He's not used to losing, and the divorce, it was the first time anyone ever told him no." Connor remained silent, letting her words find their own rhythm. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the old windows in their frames. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the mug. "He comes from old money. The kind that's been making rules for so long they've forgotten rules apply to them too. His father is a federal judge. His uncle runs the second largest investment firm on the East Coast. When we met at a Harvard Business School networking event, I thought his confidence was attractive. His connections were just good business. I didn't realize until too late that to him, everything is a transaction. Everyone is either useful or disposable." Diana pulled her knees up, hugging them to her chest, making herself smaller. "When I filed for divorce 8 months ago, he laughed, said I'd never work in business again, that he'd destroy everything I'd built. When the court granted me primary custody of Lily anyway, he told me I'd regret it, said he'd make sure I understood what real power looked like." Connor felt his jaw tighten. He'd known men like this during his service, officers who confused rank with authority, who saw their position as permission rather than responsibility. Diana looked directly at Connor for the first time since beginning her story. "I have money. I run Ashford Industries, tech consulting, $50 million in annual revenue, 200 employees. I have influence. And none of it matters. He's systematically isolated me from every support system, frozen assets through legal challenges, painted me as an unstable mother in the media." Connor understood powerlessness, though his had come in a different form. Watching Emily fade despite all their prayers and treatments, despite the specialists they'd mortgaged their future to try. Diana continued, the words coming faster now. 2 weeks ago, I found a tracking device on my car, hidden inside the rear bumper. Then strange men started showing up at Lily's school, claiming to be security consultants evaluating campus safety. The principal called me, concerned. They had legitimate-looking credentials, but something felt wrong. She paused, swallowing hard. That night, Lily told me a man at the playground asked her if she'd like to visit her daddy. Said he had a special surprise waiting. Connor's hands clenched involuntarily. Diana's voice broke slightly. That's when I knew we had to run. Not file another restraining order, not call the police again, not trust the system that kept losing my complaints in paperwork. Just run. Connor leaned forward. How did you end up here? This town isn't exactly on the way to anywhere. Diana pulled out her phone, showed him the blank screen where no signal bars appeared. That's precisely why I chose it. Random turns, no pattern, no destination. I've been paying cash only, using fake names at motels, switching cars twice. I thought I'd been careful enough. She showed him disabled location services, removed SIM card information, security settings cranked to maximum. I disabled the GPS, took out the SIM card, even had a friend in IT check for tracking software. But Marcus has resources I probably don't even know about. Connor's voice came out steadier than he felt. You can stay as long as you need. This town takes care of its own, and right now, that includes you and Lily. Diana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You don't know what you're offering, what he's capable of. He destroyed my business partner's career just for supporting me during the divorce. Had him audited, investigated, harassed until he had to leave the state. Connor thought about the promises he'd made to Emily, about teaching Noah what it meant to be a good man. Maybe not. But I know what it's like to protect someone you love. And I know that running only works if you have somewhere to run to. The wind outside seemed to pause, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. And in that moment of silence, they both heard it. The low rumble of an engine somewhere beyond the white curtain of snow, too steady to be thunder, too deliberate to be coincidence. Connor moved to the window first, careful to stay to the side, peering out through the narrow gap between frame and wall. The workshop's exterior floodlight, motion-activated and battery-powered, hadn't triggered, which meant whoever was out there was staying beyond its range. Through the dense snowfall, he could make out headlights, stationary but lit, like eyes in the darkness. They weren't moving, just sitting there about 50 yards away, engine running. Connor's voice came out calm, controlled. Lily's room. Wake her. Keep them together, away from windows. Diana didn't question, didn't hesitate. She moved with fluid efficiency, someone who'd rehearsed this scenario in her mind dozens of times. Connor heard her gentle voice rousing Lily, the child's sleepy confusion mixing with immediate alertness. Connor killed the lights throughout the apartment, plunging them into darkness save for the faint glow from the stove's dying embers. His eyes adjusted quickly, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar space. He grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter and found it dead, the storm having knocked out more than just the cell towers. Through the window, he watched a second set of headlights join the first, positioning itself at a different angle. Then a third vehicle arrived, completing a loose triangle formation. 3 vehicles for 1 woman and a child. This wasn't a rescue party. Diana returned to his side, her breath shallow but controlled, holding something small in her palm. Connor looked down and saw it. A tiny device no bigger than a quarter, its LED light still blinking green. Diana's whisper was tight with barely controlled rage. I found it. Inside Mr. Button's, Lily's stuffed bunny. The one thing I never thought to check because she's had it since she was 2. Marcus gave her a new improved version for her birthday last month. Said the old one looked worn out. She won't sleep without it. The cruelty of it, using a child's comfort object as a tracking device, told Connor everything he needed to know about Marcus Thornton. Diana's CEO composure was cracking under maternal terror.
Is there another way out? Connor's mind was already calculating distances and dangers.
Loading dock in the back of the workshop leads to the old pier road. From there, it's about 300 yards to the tree line. But in this snow, with the kids? He trailed off, running numbers. There's an old fishing cabin about a half-mile through the woods. My friend Ryan owns it. He's the county sheriff. Keeps it stocked for emergencies. Food, water, emergency radio. If you can make it there, you can wait out the storm, call for help when the phones come back. Diana's hand gripped his arm. What about you? Connor was already moving, pulling on his boots, grabbing the emergency kit from the closet. Someone needs to buy you time. Make them think you're still here, maybe heading out the front. He handed Diana a flashlight, his workshop keys, and a hand-drawn map he sketched quickly on the back of an envelope. Blue key opens the loading dock. Follow the tree line, keep the wind at your back. Ryan's cabin has a red door, only one out there. Spare key is under a fake rock by the left front corner of the porch. Diana's voice came out strangled.
I can't let you... Connor cut her off. Yes, you can. I know this building like my own heartbeat. I know these woods, every trail and hollow. I know this storm and how it moves. You don't. He pulled on his navy jacket. Get the kids to safety. That's all that matters now. Diana calculated. Connor could see her running the same numbers he had. In the blizzard, with a 7-year-old, the half-mile to the cabin would take 30 to 35 minutes. They'd need time to get far enough ahead. Diana's hand moved to his face, cupping his cheek in a gesture so unexpected and tender that it momentarily transported Connor back to Emily's goodbye kiss before her final surgery. Then Diana was gone, moving toward the children's room, and Connor was alone with his thoughts and his choices and the knowledge that he might not survive what came next. Connor gave them 90 seconds, listening to the muffled sounds of their escape down the back stairs. Noah's sleepy voice asking questions, Diana's calm responses, Lily's small footsteps on worn wood. The careful creak of the workshop door opening to the storm, the whisper of wind as it closed again. Connor deliberately turned on the living room light and walked past the window, making sure his silhouette was visible. He opened the apartment door to the workshop, letting it bang against the wall as if someone had left in a hurry, then knocked over a chair for good measure. His workshop was more than just a business. It was a 3-dimensional puzzle he'd been solving for 20 years. Every beam, every tool, every pile of lumber had purpose and potential. Connor's phone suddenly buzzed in his pocket. One carrier signal had flickered back to life temporarily. Unknown number, but Connor didn't need caller ID to know who it would be. He answered. The voice on the other end was cultured, cold, completely at odds with the violence of the storm. Mr. Hayes, my name is Marcus Thornton. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Connor felt Diana tense beside him in the darkness, her hand moving instinctively toward the stairs where the children waited. But he squeezed her shoulder gently, signaling her to stay quiet, to let him handle this opening gambit. She'd already started moving toward Noah's room to gather the kids, trusting him to buy the time they needed. Connor kept his voice level, conversational, as if he received calls from billionaires threatening him in the middle of blizzards every day. I have 2 guests who needed shelter from the storm. Last I checked, that's not a crime, even in Massachusetts. Marcus's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Don't play games with me, Turner. He caught himself. Hayes, my apologies. I know exactly who you are. Small-town carpenter, widower, struggling to make ends meet, raising a boy alone. Navy veteran, honorable discharge, clean record except for a few late mortgage payments after your wife's illness. You have no idea what you've stepped into here. The casual recitation of his personal information was meant to intimidate, to show the reach of Marcus's resources. Connor recognized the tactic from his military days, psychological warfare, establishing dominance through information asymmetry. But Connor had been on the receiving end of far more effective intimidation attempts in places where the consequences were measured in lives lost rather than legal threats. Connor's reply was deliberate, each word chosen to project calm authority.
I know enough. I know a bully when I hear one. The silence on the other end stretched for 3 seconds. Connor counted them. Before Marcus spoke again, his cultured East Coast accent hardening at the edges. A bully? How quaint.
I'm a father trying to protect his daughter from an unstable mother. Did Diana tell you about her mental health issues? The medication she's supposed to be taking? The psychiatric evaluations that recommended supervised custody? Connor glanced toward the stairs where Diana had disappeared with the children, heard the soft sounds of movement as she woke them, gathered their things. He needed to keep Marcus talking, keep him focused on this conversation instead of sending his people around to check the perimeter. She told me enough to know you're lying. Marcus's voice took on a tone of practiced concern, the kind lawyers used in courtrooms to sway juries. Did she? Did she mention the incident at Lily's school board meeting last month? The scene she caused, screaming at administrators, making wild accusations? The restraining order I had to file after she threatened me in front of witnesses. Connor heard the grandfather clock in the apartment strike 10:30. Diana needed 35 minutes to reach the cabin. He needed to stall Marcus for at least 20. Give them enough of a head start that even if Marcus's people figured out they'd gone out the back, tracking them through the blizzard would be nearly impossible. I have documentation, Hayes. Medical records, police reports, witness statements from people who've known Diana for years, who've watched her spiral into paranoia and instability. I'm trying to help her, to get her the treatment she needs before she hurts herself or our daughter. Just send them out, and this all ends peacefully. I have doctors waiting at a private facility, the best care money can buy. Connor recognized the gaslighting wrapped in concern, lies dressed as love, the abuser's playbook of painting the victim as the dangerous one. He'd seen it during his Navy years, had helped extract women and children from situations where the threat came from inside the home instead of outside. Here's what's going to happen, Thornton. Connor deliberately used Marcus's last name without the honorific, a small power play that military training had taught him mattered in negotiations. You're going to turn those vehicles around and leave. The storm's getting worse, and I'd hate for you to get stuck out here. Road back to town floods when the tide comes in, and that's in about 90 minutes. He could hear Diana moving through the apartment now, gathering Noah and Lily, keeping them quiet and calm. Connor pressed on, keeping Marcus's attention fixed on him. You're not listening, Hayes. Marcus's voice had shifted from concerned father to something colder, more calculating. I have legal documents giving me emergency custody based on Diana's mental state. My security team has authorization to retrieve my daughter by any means necessary. You're harboring a kidnapper, interfering with a lawful custody order. That's a federal offense that could cost you everything. Your business, your home, your son. Connor walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, pulled out the envelope where he kept important documents. His fingers found what he was looking for. The business card Sheriff Ryan Cole had given him 2 years ago, with a handwritten note on the back. Trouble comes, call this number. Cellular backup, works even when towers are down. I'm sheltering a mother and child from a storm, Connor countered, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd made decisions under pressure before, who understood that some stands were worth taking regardless of the cost. And last I checked, your divorce decree doesn't give you any rights to break into my home in the middle of the night with what looks like a small army. That SUV out front? Massachusetts plates. You cross state lines. Whatever jurisdiction you think you have, ended at the Maine border. Connor heard the workshop door below creak open, Diana taking Noah and Lily down the back stairs. He moved back toward the window, making sure his silhouette remained visible, a target to keep Marcus's attention focused on the front of the building. Marcus's laugh was humorless. You really think state lines matter? My father sits on the federal bench. My uncle chairs the appropriations committee that funds half the law enforcement in New England. I have senators on speed dial and lawyers who've never lost a custody case. You're a carpenter In a town of what, 3,000 people? You have no idea the forces you're up against.
Connor checked his watch. 10:32. Diana had been moving for 2 minutes. She'd need another 3 to get the kids dressed warmly, gather supplies, reach the loading dock. 5 minutes total before they'd be exposed in the open, heading for the tree line.
20 minutes, Hayes. Marcus's voice had taken on the clipped precision of someone used to issuing ultimatums. After that, my security team comes in. They're all former military, like yourself. Delta Force, Marine Recon, SEALs. Very good at their jobs, very professional. Unlike you, they're not emotionally compromised by some misguided sense of chivalry. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Connor felt something cold and precise settle in his chest. The same calm that had descended during combat operations when the shooting started and there was no room for fear, only action. 20 minutes is plenty of time for me to upload the security footage from my workshop to the cloud. You know, the cameras that have been recording since your vehicles arrived. The ones that will show armed men breaking into a private residence where children are present. I'm sure the media would find that fascinating, especially given your family's political connections. Federal judge's son directing armed assault on civilian home. That's a headline that might be hard for even your lawyers to spin. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. Connor heard Diana's footsteps on the stairs leading down to the workshop floor, heard the whispered instructions to Noah and Lily to stay close, stay quiet. The loading dock was in the back corner, obscured from the front windows by stacks of lumber and equipment. If Marcus's people were watching the front, they wouldn't see the escape. When Marcus spoke again, the veneer of civility had cracked, revealing something harder underneath. You have no idea what you're risking, Hayes. Your son, your business, your pathetic little life in this dying town. I can destroy all of it with 3 phone calls. The bank that holds your mortgage? My uncle's firm handles their corporate restructuring. 1 word from me and they'll accelerate your loan. Call it due in full. That workshop you're so proud of? The building permits, the business licenses, the zoning variances, all of it can disappear. And your son? Child Protective Services takes anonymous reports very seriously, especially when they come from concerned citizens with documentation about unstable single fathers. Connor's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. 19 minutes, 30 seconds, Thornton. Clock's ticking. He ended the call. Connor stood in the darkness of his apartment, watching the 3 sets of headlights through the window, and felt the weight of the choice he'd just made settle over him. He'd crossed a line. You didn't hang up on men like Marcus Thornton and expect them to simply go away. But Diana and the kids needed time, needed distance, needed the head start that would mean the difference between escape and capture. Connor moved quickly through the apartment, gathering what he needed. The tactical mindset was coming back now, muscle memory from a life he'd thought he'd left behind when he'd traded his uniform for woodworking tools. He grabbed the go bag from the back of his closet, the one he'd packed after Emily died and never quite been able to throw away, some part of him always preparing for the next crisis, even as he tried to build a peaceful life. Inside, emergency flares, battery-powered radio, first aid kit, waterproof matches, energy bars. Connor added his Navy K-bar knife, the one piece of military equipment he'd kept when everything else had been turned in. Then he headed downstairs. The workshop was vast and dark, illuminated only by the emergency exit signs and the faint glow from the wood stove. Connor knew every inch of this space, every support beam, every piece of equipment, every pile of lumber stacked along the walls. His grandfather had built this place to last, using ship timber and techniques that predated modern construction codes. The main support posts were 12 by 12 rough-hewn oak, strong enough to hold up 3 stories. The floorboards were 2-inch pine, installed with hand-forged nails that wouldn't pull free even under extreme stress. Connor moved through the darkness with practiced ease, his hands finding tools and materials without needing to see them. From the metal shop in the corner, he retrieved aircraft cable,
quarter-inch steel rated for 3,000 pounds of tensile strength. From the lumber rack, he pulled down 4x8 sheets of 3/4-inch plywood. From the finishing supplies, he grabbed gallon cans of wood stain, the oil-based kind that was slippery as ice when spilled. Working quickly, Connor began setting his traps. The first line of aircraft cable went across the main entrance, stretched between two support posts at ankle height. In the darkness, it would be invisible.
Anna secured it with climbing carabiners, the kind rock climbers used to anchor their safety lines, and adjusted the tension until the cable was taut as a guitar string. A running man would hit it at full speed and go down hard. The second and third cables went at different heights and angles, creating a web of trip hazards that would funnel intruders into specific paths Connor could predict and exploit. Next came the plywood sheets. Connor balanced them on the edge of the equipment loft 15 feet above the workshop floor, positioning them so that the slightest disturbance would send them cascading down. Each sheet weighed 80 pounds, not enough to kill, but more than enough to stun, disorient, separate a tactical team, and break their formation.
Connor moved to the industrial saw station and carefully poured wood stain across the concrete floor in strategic locations, creating slick patches that would be impossible to see in the dark and nearly impossible to cross without falling. The oil-based stain wouldn't dry for hours, would remain treacherously slippery even as men tried to maintain their footing. He checked his watch. 10:38. Diana and the kids had been gone for 6 minutes. They'd be at the tree line by now, starting the trek through the woods to Ryan's cabin. 30 more minutes, and they'd be safe, warm, able to call for help on the emergency radio Ryan kept there. Connor positioned himself behind his grandfather's massive oak workbench, the same bench that had been in this workshop since 1947, built from a single massive white oak that had taken 3 men and a team of horses to move. The top was 2 inches of solid oak, the base constructed from timbers salvaged from a whaling ship.
It was heavy enough to stop small arms fire, solid enough to use as cover if things went kinetic. From this position, Connor had clear sight lines to all 3 entrances: front door, side door, loading dock. He could move quickly to any of them, could use the equipment and lumber stacks as cover, could control the battlefield in a way that training and familiarity would trump numbers and firepower. Connor pulled out the business card Ryan had given him, the one with the cellular backup number. He dialed, heard it ring twice before Ryan's voice came through, groggy, but alert. "This is Cole." "Ryan, it's Connor. I'm triggering the silent alarm protocol. 3 vehicles, hostile intentions, armed men likely. Woman and child fleeing domestic situation, heading to your cabin on foot. Ex-husband is Marcus Thornton, federal judge's son, connected, dangerous. I'm buying them time." Ryan's voice sharpened immediately. The fog of sleep burned away by adrenaline and training. How many hostiles? 3 vehicles, estimate 4 to 6 men. Professional, probably private military contractors. They'll breach in, Connor checked his watch, 14 minutes. I'm 20 minutes out in this storm, maybe 25. Can you hold? Connor looked around his workshop, at the traps he'd set, at the familiar space that had been his sanctuary and was now about to become a battleground. I can hold. Connor. Ryan's voice carried the weight of shared history, of 2 men who'd seen combat and understood what it cost. Don't do anything stupid. These aren't Taliban fighters. You can't just drop them and walk away. There will be consequences. Connor thought about Diana's face when she'd found the tracking device in her daughter's stuffed animal, about Lily's terror, about Noah growing up without both parents because his father had made a choice to stand between danger and the defenseless. I know, but some things are worth the consequences. 17 minutes, Ryan said. Hold for 17 minutes and I'll have units converging from 3 directions. Storm's bad, but we've got chains and determination. Just don't get yourself killed. Connor ended the call and settled into position behind the workbench. He pulled the Navy K-bar from its sheath, felt the familiar weight of the 7-inch blade in his hand. Not a weapon he wanted to use, but one he would if necessary.
The knife had seen action in Kandahar, had saved his life when his sidearm jammed during a close-quarters encounter with insurgents. It was a tool of last resort, but sometimes last resorts were all you had. The workshop was silent except for the wind howling outside and the creak of old timbers settling under the weight of accumulated snow. Connor's breathing slowed, his heart rate dropping into the controlled rhythm that training had taught him to maintain under stress. His senses sharpened. He could smell the pine sawdust that permeated everything, could hear the whisper of wind through gaps in the siding, could feel the cold radiating from the windows. Outside, the 3 sets of headlights remained stationary. Marcus was waiting for his deadline to expire, giving Connor one last chance to comply before sending his people in. It was a tactical mistake. Every minute Marcus waited was another minute Diana and the kids got farther away, another minute for Connor to prepare, another minute closer to Ryan's arrival. But Marcus didn't know about the silent alarm, didn't know that help was already mobilizing, didn't know that his carefully planned operation was already falling apart. Connor's phone buzzed again. Same number. He considered not answering, but information was valuable, and Marcus might reveal something useful. 12 minutes, Hayes. Marcus's voice was colder now, all pretense of civility abandoned.
I'm going to tell you what happens when you cross men like me. First, my team will enter your workshop and retrieve what belongs to me. If you resist, they're authorized to use necessary force. Not lethal, I'm not a monster, but enough to ensure compliance. Connor remained silent, letting Marcus talk, using the time to scan his perimeter one more time, verifying that everything was in position. Marcus continued, his voice taking on a lecturing quality, as if he were explaining basic economics to a slow student. Then, after Diana and Lily are safely in treatment, I'll turn my attention to you. The mortgage acceleration I mentioned? That will happen. Your business licenses? Revoked for zoning violations that will be discovered during a routine inspection. Your son? Well, a man who deliberately endangers a child by involving them in a custody dispute probably isn't fit to be a parent, is he? Connor felt anger rising, but pushed it down, channeled it into focus.
Anger made you sloppy, made you miss details, made you dead. He'd seen good men die because they let emotion override training. But here's what really happens, Hayes. Marcus's voice dropped to something almost conversational, as if they were discussing the weather instead of threats. You'll lose everything over the next 6 months. The bank will foreclose, the state will take your son pending investigation, and you'll be facing federal charges for interfering with a lawful custody order. By the time the legal system is done with you, you'll be broke, alone, and broken. And for what? A woman you met tonight? A misguided sense of honor that went out of style with rotary phones? Connor glanced at his watch. 10:43. Marcus had been talking for 5 minutes, burning through his own deadline. Diana and the kids were 11 minutes into their escape, probably halfway to the cabin by now if they'd kept a good pace despite the storm. Or, Marcus said, his voice shifting to something that might have been reasonable if you didn't know what lay beneath it, you can be smart. Open your door, let my team do their job, and walk away from this with your life intact. I'm not unreasonable, Hayes. I understand you thought you were helping. I'll even compensate you for your trouble. Say, $50,000 for your time and discretion. That's more than you make in a year from that workshop, isn't it? The offer was meant to be tempting, meant to show Connor that resistance was futile and cooperation was profitable. But it also revealed something important. Marcus still thought this was a transaction, still believed that everyone had a price, still couldn't conceive of someone acting on principle rather than profit. Connor's voice came out quiet, steady, carrying across the phone line with absolute conviction. You want to know what I think, Thornton? I think you're terrified. Not of losing Lily. You see her as property, not a person. You're terrified that Diana got away, that someone finally stood up to you, that your power isn't as absolute as you thought. You've spent your whole life believing that money and connections make you untouchable, And now you're discovering that some things can't be bought or intimidated into submission. The silence on the other end stretched for 5 seconds. Connor counted them. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd stopped negotiating and started executing. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Hayes. Whatever happens next is on you. The line went dead. Connor set down his phone and took a deep breath. 10:45. Marcus's 20-minute deadline had arrived. Connor settled lower behind the workbench, knife in one hand, the other resting on the can of emergency flares he'd positioned within easy reach. The workshop door exploded inward.
Not kicked, blown with a small-shaped charge that turned the lock mechanism into twisted metal. The door slammed against the wall hard enough to crack plaster, and 4 men poured through in diamond formation, moving with the fluid precision of professional operators. They wore black tactical gear, body armor, helmets with night vision goggles, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor in ready positions. Not guns, Connor noted with grim satisfaction. Tasers and batons, less lethal weapons that would allow them to claim they'd used appropriate force when questioned later. The lead man, Alpha, Connor designated him, moved straight down the center aisle toward the workbench, his night vision goggles giving him clear sight in the darkness that was Connor's advantage. 2 flankers spread left and right, moving to cut off escape routes. The 4th man stayed by the door as rear security. Connor waited, completely still, breathing shallow and silent.
The lead man was 20 feet away. 19. 18. Connor pulled the release cord. The cascade of plywood sheets from the equipment loft sounded like thunder in the enclosed space. 80 pounds of 3/4-inch plywood caught Alpha square in the chest and shoulders, the impact driving him backward into Bravo, the left flanker. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and equipment. Alpha's night vision goggles ripped free, Bravo's taser skittering across the concrete floor. The right flanker, Charlie, spun toward the noise, bringing his baton up and caught the ankle-height aircraft cable with his leading foot. The cable was invisible even to night vision, a line of shadow among shadows. Charlie's momentum carried him forward even as his feet were yanked backward, sending him sprawling face first onto the concrete with enough force that Connor heard the crack of the man's helmet against the floor.
The rear security man, Delta, started to advance, weapon raised, shouting into his radio for backup. Connor lit the emergency flare. The magnesium flare burned at 3,000 degrees, bright enough to turn night into day, hot enough to ignite anything flammable within 2 feet. Connor had positioned it carefully, away from the wood stain, but close enough to the lumber stacks that the sudden illumination would overload the night vision goggles that Delta was wearing. Delta screamed, hands flying to his face, temporarily blinded by the afterimage burned into his retinas. Connor was already moving, coming around the workbench low and fast, using furniture and equipment as cover. Alpha was struggling to his feet, hampered by the body armor and the plywood sheet still tangled around his legs. Connor drove his shoulder into the man's midsection, using the momentum to carry them both into a stack of 2x4s. The impact drove the air from Alpha's lungs, left him gasping and disoriented. Connor didn't want to hurt these men more than necessary. They were professionals, doing a job, probably had families waiting at home, probably didn't know the full truth of what Marcus was doing. But he needed them incapacitated, needed them unable to pursue Diana and the kids, needed them to understand that this wasn't going to be the easy retrieval operation they'd been promised. Bravo had regained his feet, taser in hand, red laser dot searching for a target. Connor grabbed a piece of scrap 2x4 and hurled it at the man's head. Bravo ducked, the laser dot wavering, and Connor used the distraction to close the distance. Years of close-quarters combat training took over, muscle memory executing techniques that had been drilled until they became instinctive. Connor trapped Bravo's taser arm, rotated his hips, and threw the man over his shoulder in a classic judo throw that sent him crashing into the industrial saw table. Charlie was trying to stand, still dazed from his impact with the floor. Connor swept his legs again, gentler this time, just enough to keep him down without causing serious injury. Delta had recovered enough to stumble forward, hands still pressed to his burning eyes, shouting into his radio. "Multiple hostiles! Repeat, multiple hostiles! We need backup!" Connor almost laughed at that. Multiple hostiles when it was just him, but the situation was too serious for humor. He moved toward Delta, intending to disarm him peacefully, when Alpha recovered enough to lunge. The tackle caught Connor in the ribs, driving him backward into the workbench. Alpha was bigger, younger, probably outweighed Connor by 40 pounds of muscle. They grappled, Connor's training warring with Alpha's youth and size advantage. Alpha got a hand on Connor's throat, squeezing, trying to cut off blood flow to the brain. Connor drove his thumb into the pressure point behind Alpha's ear, a Navy SEAL technique that caused instant, excruciating pain without permanent damage. Alpha's grip loosened, his face contorting, and Connor followed up with a knee to the solar plexus that dropped the man to the floor, gasping for air. Connor spun to check on the others. Bravo was unconscious, slumped against the saw table. Charlie was on his hands and knees, shaking his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. Delta had his radio out, still calling for backup that wasn't coming because the storm was interfering with transmissions. Connor was breathing hard, adrenaline flooding his system, every sense heightened. He checked his watch. 10:49. 4 minutes since the breach. Diana and the kids had 15 minutes of head start now, would be more than halfway to the cabin. The front door opened again, letting in a blast of Arctic air and swirling snow. Marcus Thornton stepped through, expensive wool coat dusted with white, Italian leather shoes completely inappropriate for the weather. He stayed in the doorway, surveying the scene with the detached interest of someone watching a sporting event. "Impressive, Hayes." Marcus's voice carried across the workshop, cultured and cold. "My security consultant told me you were just a carpenter playing at soldier. Clearly, he underestimated you." Connor straightened, keeping the workbench between himself and Marcus, his hand resting on the K-bar knife still sheathed at his belt. "Your consultant was half right. I am a carpenter, but I was a soldier first." Marcus stepped fully inside, letting the door close behind him. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real physical danger, who'd spent his life insulated by money and power, and the belief that consequences were for other people.
"Where is she, Hayes? Diana and my daughter. Where did you send them?" Connor remained silent. Marcus pulled out his phone, checked the screen. The tracking device shows them moving northeast through the woods. Slow progress in this storm. They can't have gotten far. I have 3 more teams mobilizing from different positions. Even in this weather, they'll be found within the hour. Connor's blood chilled. If Marcus had more people in the woods, if they had thermal imaging or night vision, if they could triangulate based on the tracking device. But then Connor remembered. The tracking device was still in his pocket, the one Diana had pulled from the stuffed bunny. Whatever signal Marcus was seeing was coming from here, from the workshop, not from Diana and Lily moving through the woods. Marcus was bluffing, hoping Connor would give away their position. "You're wasting your time, Thornton. They're long gone, and they're not coming back. You lost." Marcus's composure cracked for the first time, anger flashing across his face before he reasserted control. "I don't lose. Not to people like you. Diana will make mistakes, she always does. She'll use her credit card, she'll call someone from her old life, she'll leave a trail. And when she does, I'll be there. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." Connor heard something then, faint beneath the howling wind. Sirens. Multiple vehicles, growing louder, cutting through the storm. Marcus heard them too. His expression shifted from confidence to calculation, the businessman computing odds and outcomes. "How? The phones are down, the cell towers." "Dedicated cellular backup," Connor said. "Silent alarm connected directly to the county sheriff. Triggered the moment your first man entered. My friend Ryan's been mobilizing units for the last 15 minutes.
You have maybe 60 seconds before this place is surrounded by every cop within 20 miles.
Marcus's face contorted with rage, the mask of civility completely gone.
This isn't over. I have lawyers who will tear you apart. I'll sue you for everything you own, have you arrested for assault, make sure you never see your son again. Single-party consent state, Connor interrupted. I've been recording this entire conversation from the moment you called. Your threats, your admission of surveillance, your armed assault on a civilian residence, all of it on tape, all of it admissible in court. The security cameras have been running since your vehicles arrived. Battery backup, cloud storage, redundant systems. Connor pulled out his phone, held it up so Marcus could see the screen. Every word you said. Every threat you made. Every admission that you fabricated mental health claims and used your daughter's toy to track her. The court's going to find it fascinating, especially the part where you admitted to destroying Diana's business partner's career as retaliation.
The sirens were loud now, close enough that Connor could see red and blue lights painting the snow outside. Marcus turned toward the door, toward escape, but Ryan Cole's booming voice cut through the night on a loudspeaker.
This is Sheriff Cole. Everyone exit the building immediately. Hands visible. Move slowly. You are surrounded.
Marcus stood frozen for a moment, trapped between the approaching police and the evidence of his crimes, his face a mask of impotent fury. Then his shoulders straightened, the businessman reasserting control, already planning his legal defense, already computing how to spin this into something survivable. My lawyers will have me out by morning, Marcus said, his voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. And then we'll see who the court believes. A respected businessman with documentation, or a widow who's been dreaming up conspiracies to justify his violent assault on my security team.
Your documentation includes forged custody papers, Connor said quietly. FBI document examiners are going to love that. Federal forgery charges, Marcus. Your father can't make those disappear, no matter how many judges he knows.
Marcus's expression flickered. Surprise, then fear, quickly masked. You're bluffing. Connor shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe Diana spent the last 2 weeks documenting everything, gathering evidence, building a case with lawyers her own, while you were so busy threatening her that you didn't notice. Either way, we're about to find out. The workshop doors burst open again, this time with Sheriff Ryan Cole leading a team of deputies, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the scene, separating Marcus from his security team, checking on the injured. Ryan approached Connor, taking in the scattered equipment, the unconscious men, the general chaos.
You held. Connor nodded, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him hollow. Diana and Lily?
Got the call from the cabin radio 10 minutes ago. All 3 of them safe and warm. Noah says to tell you the hot chocolate at Ryan's place is almost as good as his. The sheriff's grin faded. Medics are on the way for your guests. Nobody's seriously hurt, but they're going to need statements and probably some ice packs. Marcus was being led toward a patrol car, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He looked back at Connor one last time, his expression promising retribution, promising that this wasn't over, that men like him always found a way to win eventually. But Connor had seen that look before, in the eyes of enemy combatants who'd believed their cause was righteous and their victory inevitable, right up until the moment they'd lost. Belief didn't make you right. Power didn't make you invincible.
And sometimes the universe delivered exactly the justice it owed. Ryan clapped Connor on the shoulder. Come on, let's get you checked out by the EMTs, then we'll take your statement. After that, you can see your boy and tell him his dad's okay. Connor followed Ryan out into the storm, leaving behind the workshop that had been his sanctuary and his battlefield.
walking toward the police cruisers and the flashing lights and the knowledge that everything was about to change. The storm was beginning to ease, the wind dying down, the snow falling more gently now. In the distance, Connor could see the first hints of dawn touching the eastern sky, promising that this longest night was finally coming to an end. The fire marshal's report landed on Sheriff Ryan Cole's desk at 8:15 Monday morning, 72 hours after the storm.
Anna sat across from him in the small municipal building that served as both police station and county administrative office, nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, while Ryan reviewed the damage assessment for the third time. $12,000 in repairs. The electrical panel Delta's taser had struck would need complete replacement. Water damage from the sprinkler system had warped floorboards and soaked into walls that would require professional restoration. Smoke residue coated beams that had stood for 70 years without blemish. The photographs showed scorch marks on his grandfather's workbench, tools scattered like battlefield debris, the physical evidence of violence in a space that had been dedicated to creation. Ryan closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Insurance should cover most of it. Self-defense is pretty clear-cut when 4 armed men break into your home.
Marcus's people are already offering to settle. They know they're exposed on about 15 different charges. Connor steadied his hands, the bruises on his knuckles already fading from purple to yellow-green. His shoulder ached where Alpha had tackled him, and he discovered a cracked rib during the EMT examination that first night. Small prices for buying Diana and the kids the time they needed. What about Marcus? Ryan pulled out a different folder, this one stamped with federal seals. Arraignment was Saturday morning. Judge set bail at $5 million. He paid it within 2 hours. But here's where it gets interesting. FBI document examiner confirmed yesterday that the emergency custody order was forged. Judge Richard Thornton's signature doesn't match. Different pressure points, wrong ink composition, everything. Richard's cooperating fully with the investigation, which tells you how serious this is.
A federal judge doesn't throw his own son under the bus unless he's trying to save his career. Connor absorbed that information. Marcus had built his life on the assumption that family connections would protect him from consequences, that power and money created immunity. Discovering that protection had limits must have been a novel experience. Diana's preliminary custody hearing is Thursday, Ryan continued. Prosecutors already told her lawyer that given the evidence, the tracking device, forged documents, recorded threats, armed assault, Marcus will be lucky to get supervised visitation. 2 hours a month with a court monitor present. Connor thought about Lily, about her nightmares and her fear, about the way she jumped at every unexpected sound. 2 hours a month with the man who terrorized her mother seemed like 2 hours too many. But the legal system moved slowly and valued parental rights even when those rights had been systematically abused. Federal charges? Ryan's expression grew more serious. Conspiracy, interstate stalking, forging federal documents, assault with a dangerous weapon. The taser counts as a weapon under federal guidelines. Marcus's lawyers are negotiating a plea deal, trying to get it down to 7 years with 3 years supervised release. Prosecutor wants 10 minimum, arguing that his wealth and connections make him a flight risk, and his complete lack of remorse warrants the maximum sentence. Connor felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that the scales were tipping toward balance. Justice didn't undo the harm Marcus had caused, didn't erase Lily's trauma or give Diana back the year she'd spent running and hiding. But it was something. Where are they now? Ryan's stern expression softened slightly. Diana rented the Victorian on Harborview Street, moved in yesterday with what little they had.
She's been asking about you. Wanted to know if the repairs were covered, if there was anything she could do to help. I told her you're too stubborn to accept help from anyone. Connor managed a small smile. Working on that. I know. Ryan stood, walked to the window overlooking Main Street, where spring was finally asserting itself after the brutal winter. Ice had retreated from the harbor, boats were returning to the water, and tourists were beginning to trickle back to the bed and breakfasts that sustained the town's economy. She left something for you.
Ryan pulled an envelope from his desk drawer, expensive paper stock with Connor's name written in precise script. Connor took it but didn't open it immediately, recognizing that whatever Diana had written deserved more than a quick glance in Ryan's office. "Noah's been asking when he can see Lily again," Connor said.
Kids been talking non-stop about all the things they're going to do when the weather gets better. Sailing lessons, beach forts, collecting sea glass. Ryan turned from the window, his expression knowing. "And you? What have you been thinking about?" Connor thought about Diana's face when she'd found the tracking device, about the way she'd kissed his cheek before disappearing into the storm, about the weeks since then when he'd been giving her space to settle in while fighting the urge to knock on her door and make sure she was okay. "That some things can't be rushed," Connor said finally. "Trust, healing, whatever comes next, they need time to develop properly. Like curing wood, rush it and the joints fail under pressure." Ryan's laugh was genuine. "You're comparing potential relationships to carpentry now?" Emily would have had some choice words about that romantic approach. Connor felt the familiar ache at his wife's name, but it was gentler now, more memory than fresh wound. She would have liked Diana, and she would have loved seeing Noah happy again. Then maybe stop overthinking it and go talk to her. Ryan grabbed his coat from the rack by the door. "I've got to meet with the prosecutor about Marcus's plea negotiations. You're free to go. We've got everything we need for the trial. Just stay available in case the defense wants to depose you, though I doubt they'll want you on the stand telling a jury about Marcus's threats." Connor stood, pocketed the envelope, and headed for the door. Ryan's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Hayes, you did good. Not just the tactical stuff. Anyone with your training could have handled 4 contractors. But the call you made to protect people who needed it, knowing it would cost you, that took a different kind of courage." Connor nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and walked out into the spring morning. The Victorian on Harborview Street was a grand old lady who'd seen better days. Peeling paint, sagging porch, gardens overgrown from years of neglect. But the bones were solid, the architecture sound, and Connor could see the potential beneath the deterioration. Someone with time and care could restore her to the beauty she'd once possessed. Diana's car was in the driveway, the same white SUV that had skidded into his workshop lot 3 nights ago, now looking less like an escape vehicle and more like ordinary transportation. Connor stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering courage, then walked up the front steps and knocked. Diana opened the door, wearing jeans and a paint-stained t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the polished CEO who'd arrived in designer clothes and heels. She looked younger somehow, less burdened, as if shedding the trappings of her Boston life had allowed her to breathe more freely. "Connor." Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't that first night when fear had been her primary emotion. "I was wondering when you'd stop by. Come in, please." The interior was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture arranged haphazardly, walls marked where pictures would eventually hang. Lily sat cross-legged in the middle of the living room, surrounded by stuffed animals, arranging them in what appeared to be an elaborate tea party. She looked up when Connor entered, her face lighting with recognition. "Mr. Hayes, is Noah with you?" Connor crouched down to her level. "Not today, but he wanted me to tell you he's been collecting shells from the beach for a project you two are going to work on." Lily's enthusiasm was palpable. "Really? What kind of project?" "He wouldn't tell me. Said it's a surprise, and I'm not allowed to know until it's finished." Lily giggled, a sound of pure childhood joy that seemed impossible from someone who'd been running for her life 72 hours earlier. Children were resilient in ways adults had forgotten how to be, capable of finding happiness even in the wreckage of trauma. Diana led Connor to the kitchen where boxes marked dishes and glassware were stacked against the walls. She pulled 2 mugs from a box, rinsed them in the sink, and started making coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd spent too many mornings
functioning on caffeine and determination. "Thank you," Diana said quietly, her back to him as she measured grounds into the filter. "I know I said it that night, but I don't think you understood what you gave us. Not just shelter from the storm. Safety. The first real safety we'd had in months. Maybe years." Connor leaned against the counter, watching her work.
You gave me something, too. A reminder that the skills I thought I'd left behind when I put away my uniform still mattered. That protecting people who need it isn't outdated chivalry, it's just being human. Diana turned, coffee pot in hand, her eyes holding his. "The workshop repairs. Ryan said insurance is covering most of it, but there's still a deductible. I want to pay it. And before you argue, it's not charity or pity or trying to buy anything. It's just acknowledging that you took a financial hit because of me." Connor started to refuse, old habits of self-sufficiency rising up, but something in Diana's expression stopped him. This wasn't about money. It was about agency, about Diana reclaiming control by making choices instead of having them forced on her. "Okay," Connor said simply. Diana blinked, surprised. "Okay? Just like that?" "Just like that. You want to contribute to the repairs? I'm not going to argue. But only the deductible. Insurance handles the rest." Diana's smile was small but real. She poured coffee, handed him a mug, and they stood in comfortable silence while the pot finished brewing. Through the doorway, they could hear Lily talking to her stuffed animals, narrating an elaborate story about brave knights and rescued princesses. "The custody hearing is Thursday," Diana said. "Prosecutor thinks it's just a formality at this point. Full custody to me. Supervised visitation for Marcus pending the outcome of his criminal trial. But I'm terrified anyway. What if the judge looks at my choices over the last 2 weeks and decides I'm unstable? What if Marcus's lawyers find some loophole, some technicality that gives him leverage?" Connor set down his mug and took Diana's hand, the gesture feeling more natural than it should have given how recently they'd met. "You drove through a blizzard with no destination except away from danger. You protected your daughter with nothing but determination and the willingness to risk everything for her safety." No reasonable person could look at that and see instability. They'll see a mother doing what mothers do, whatever it takes. Diana's fingers tightened around his. "Will you be there at the hearing? I know it's a lot to ask, and you've already done so much, but—" "I'll be there," Connor interrupted. "Ryan's testifying about the break-in, and I'm already scheduled as a witness. But even if I wasn't, I'd still be there." Diana leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder in a gesture of trust that felt more intimate than any kiss. They stood like that while the coffee cooled and Lily's voice rose and fell in the next room, and spring sunshine painted squares of light across the worn kitchen floor. The custody hearing took place in the district courthouse, a brick building that had served the county for 120 years. Anna sat in the gallery beside Ryan, watching Diana and her lawyer at the plaintiff's table, while Marcus and his legal team occupied the defense side. Marcus looked diminished somehow. The expensive suit couldn't hide the shadows under his eyes or the tension in his shoulders. He'd posted bail but was wearing an ankle monitor, his movements restricted to Maine pending trial. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Morrison, reviewed the evidence with methodical precision. The tracking device admitted as Exhibit A. The forged custody documents, Exhibit B. Audio recordings of Marcus's threats, Exhibit C. Security footage from Connor's workshop showing 4 armed men breaking in, Exhibit D. Marcus's lawyer argued that his client had been misled by overzealous security contractors, that he'd believed the custody documents were legitimate, that his concern for his daughter's welfare had been exploited by people who didn't have Lily's best interests at heart. Judge Morrison listened without expression, making notes on a legal pad, her face giving away nothing. Diana's lawyer presented a different narrative: systematic abuse and control,
documented over years through emails and text messages Diana had been collecting since the divorce. Medical records showing injuries Diana had explained away as accidents. Testimony from Diana's business partner about Marcus's campaign of harassment. The principal from Lily's school describing the suspicious men who'd appeared claiming to evaluate security. When Diana took the stand, Connor watched Marcus's expression shift from confident to unsettled. She spoke clearly, precisely, cataloging years of manipulation and fear with the same strategic thinking she brought to business presentations. She didn't cry, didn't falter, didn't give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing her break.
Anna felt pride rise in his chest. This was the woman who'd built a $50 million company from nothing, who'd driven through a blizzard to protect her daughter, who'd survived Marcus's attempts to destroy her and come out stronger. The judge called a brief recess after Diana's testimony. Connor watched Marcus confer with his lawyers, their expressions growing increasingly grim. Whatever strategy they'd planned was clearly failing. When court resumed, Judge Morrison delivered her ruling without preamble. Having reviewed the evidence presented and heard testimony from both parties, this court finds that Mr. Thornton has engaged in a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and abuse directed at Miss Ashford. The forged custody documents represent a serious breach of legal and ethical standards. The use of a tracking device hidden in the minor child's possession demonstrates a disturbing willingness to exploit the child's trust for purposes of surveillance and control.
Marcus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent.
This court therefore grants full physical and legal custody of Lily Ashford to her mother, Diana Ashford, effective immediately. Mr. Thornton is granted supervised visitation of 2 hours per month to be conducted at a court-approved facility with a monitor present. This arrangement will remain in effect pending the outcome of Mr. Thornton's criminal proceedings. Should Mr. Thornton be convicted of the federal charges currently pending, this court will revisit the question of whether any visitation is appropriate. The gavel fell, and Connor saw Diana's shoulders drop as tension she'd been carrying for months, maybe years, finally released its grip. Her lawyer was speaking, probably explaining next steps and filing procedures, but Diana wasn't listening.
She was looking at Lily, who sat in the children's waiting area with a social worker, and Connor could see the relief and love and fierce protectiveness that defined motherhood at its core. Outside the courthouse, Diana stood in the spring sunshine, looking lighter somehow, as if Judge Morrison's ruling had lifted a physical weight. Lily ran to her mother, and Diana swept her up, despite the girl being too big to be carried easily, holding her tight while Lily wrapped her arms around Diana's neck. Connor kept his distance, giving them space for this moment. But Diana's eyes found his across the courthouse steps. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Connor nodded, feeling something shift in his chest. Not completion, because he'd learned that other people couldn't fill the holes loss carved out, but complement. A new shape that fit alongside his grief and his healing and his cautious hope for whatever came next. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and comfortable. Diana threw herself into restoring the Victorian with the same intensity she'd once brought to corporate strategy. Connor found himself stopping by most afternoons after closing the workshop, ostensibly to help with repairs, but really just to be present while Diana transformed the house from neglected relic into home. They painted rooms together, Diana making decisions about colors, while Connor cut in edges with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years working with his hands. They refinished the hardwood floors that had been hidden under decades of carpet, revealing oak planks that matched the wood in Connor's workshop. They replanted the gardens, Lily and Noah working alongside them to dig holes and water seedlings and argue about whether tomatoes or cucumbers should go in the sunniest spot. The children were inseparable now, their friendship deepening into something that looked like sibling affection. Noah taught Lily to identify different types of shells they found on the beach, while Lily shared her extensive knowledge of marine biology learned from books she'd devoured during the months of running and hiding. They built elaborate forts from driftwood,
and planned adventures that always ended with the heroes winning and the villains learning important lessons about being kind. Connor watched Noah bloom with companionship, saw his son laugh more freely and act his age instead of the miniature adult he'd become after Emily's death. Lily's nightmares decreased gradually, first to 3 times a week, then twice, then only occasionally. The hypervigilance faded, replaced by the normal caution of a child who'd learned the world could be dangerous, but had also learned it could be safe. Diana transformed too.
The Ice Queen CEO exterior melted away, revealing someone warmer underneath. Quick to laugh, surprisingly competitive during the board games they played on rainy evenings, passionate about causes she believed in. She still ran Ashford Industries, still took video calls with her board and reviewed quarterly reports, but she'd established boundaries her previous life hadn't allowed. She'd promoted her VP to interim CEO and taken a 6-month sabbatical, announcing to the board that Lily needed stability more than the company needed her daily involvement. The decision had shocked her colleagues, but had been the right choice for her daughter and herself. Connor and Diana fell into their own rhythm, separate from the children. Coffee twice a week at the Harbor Cafe, sitting at the corner table where tourists rarely ventured, talking about everything and nothing. They didn't rush toward labels or definitions, both too aware of how badly things could go wrong when you built relationships on shared trauma instead of genuine compatibility. But there were moments. Diana's hand on Connor's arm when he made her laugh. Connor holding doors and letting his hand rest briefly on Diana's back. The way their eyes would meet across a room and hold for a beat longer than necessary. Small gestures that meant nothing or meant everything, depending on whether either of them was ready to acknowledge what was developing. One Saturday in early May, Connor found himself in his workshop finishing a rocking chair Diana had commissioned for Lily's room. The wood was white oak from a local tree, chosen for its strength and the beauty of its grain. Connor had spent 3 weeks on the piece, getting the curves exactly right, sanding until the surface felt like silk, applying finish in thin coats that brought out the natural color. Diana appeared in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun, watching him work. Connor set down his sandpaper and straightened, suddenly aware of the sawdust in his hair and the wood stain on his hands. Diana stepped inside, running her fingers along the rocking chair's armrest. "It's beautiful. Lily's going to love it." Connor shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "It's just wood and patience. Nothing special." Diana's eyes caught his, serious now. "You really don't see it, do you? The care you put into everything you do? Most people in my world view everything as transactional. You pay money, you get a product, no relationship beyond the exchange. But you build things meant to last generations." Connor thought about his grandfather's workbench, still solid after 70 years. "My grandfather used to say, you can tell a man's character by what he leaves behind. Buildings and furniture outlast their makers. Might as well make sure they're worth remembering." Diana moved closer, and Connor became acutely aware of the small space between them. "The kids are asking about summer sailing camp. Both of them want to register together." Connor felt something shift in his chest. "Both of them?" Diana smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "Both of them. As a team. They filled out the application last night and want us both to sign it." The word us hung in the air between them, weighted with implication. Not you and I separately, but together, a unit making decisions about their children's futures in tandem. Connor's voice came out rougher than intended. "I'd like that." Diana stepped closer still, close enough that Connor could count the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "I'm terrified of this. Of us. Of letting myself believe that maybe I deserve something good after Marcus. That maybe Lily deserves a childhood where she's not constantly afraid." Connor thought about wood grain, about how the best pieces required patience and couldn't be rushed. "Then we go slow. We're honest with each other and with the kids. We don't make promises we can't keep, and we don't pretend we have all the answers.
Diana's hand found Connor's, fingers intertwining in a gesture that was becoming familiar. I can work with that. Through the window, Noah and Lily were visible in the yard, chasing each other around the old oak tree that had stood there longer than the workshop itself. Their laughter drifted in on the spring breeze, pure and uncomplicated. Connor thought about Emily, about the promises he'd made and the ones he'd broken, and the new ones he was starting to believe he might be able to keep. About how hearts could expand rather than replace, how love wasn't a zero-sum game where new feelings erased old ones. By mid-June, Marcus's plea negotiations had concluded.
His lawyers had managed to get the sentence down to 7 years federal prison, with 3 years supervised release, citing his cooperation with the investigation and his father's public condemnation of his actions. The prosecutor had wanted 10 years, but had accepted the deal to avoid a lengthy trial that would have forced Diana and Lily to testify. Connor attended the sentencing hearing with Diana, sitting in the gallery, while Marcus stood before Judge Morrison one final time. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms and threatened to destroy anyone who crossed him now looked diminished in his prison jumpsuit, the ankle monitor having been replaced with handcuffs. Judge Morrison's words were precise and unforgiving. Mr. Thornton, you used your wealth, your connections, and your position to systematically terrorize your ex-wife and daughter. You exploited a child's love and trust by using her comfort object as a surveillance device. You forged federal documents and directed armed men to break into a private residence. These are not the actions of a concerned father. They are the actions of someone who views other people as possessions to be controlled, rather than individuals with rights and dignity. Marcus remained expressionless, but Connor saw his jaw tighten. This court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. During your incarceration and supervised release, you are prohibited from any contact with Diana Ashford or Lily Ashford, except as specifically authorized by the court. Should you violate this order, you will be subject to additional criminal penalties. The gavel fell, and Marcus was led away by federal marshals. He looked back once at Diana, his expression promising nothing. No apology, no remorse, just the flat acknowledgement that this chapter had closed. Outside the courthouse, Diana stood in the summer sunshine, looking peaceful for the first time since Connor had known her. It's really over, she said, the words carrying wonder and disbelief in equal measure. Connor took her hand. Not over, just beginning. The summer unfolded with the lazy warmth particular to coastal Maine. Connor taught both kids to sail in the harbor, starting with basic knots and water safety before progressing to actual time on the water. Lily proved to be a natural, her fear of the unknown transforming into eagerness once she understood the mechanics. Noah was more cautious but persistent, working through challenges with the same methodical determination his father brought to woodworking. Diana watched from the dock, initially anxious about Lily being on the water, but gradually relaxing as she saw her daughter's confidence grow. Anna caught her smiling one afternoon when Lily successfully tacked for the first time, the small sailboat responding to the girl's commands with precision. Evenings often ended with all 4 of them on the beach, building driftwood fires and roasting marshmallows while the sun set over the harbor. Noah and Lily would chase each other along the waterline, collecting shells and sea glass, while Connor and Diana sat close enough that their shoulders touched, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other beyond words. One Friday evening in late July, the kids lobbied for a sleepover at Connor's apartment. Diana agreed, with the condition that everyone had to be in bed by 10, a rule that Noah and Lily immediately began negotiating upward. Connor made his serviceable lasagna, ground beef, jarred sauce, cheese layered with the precision of repetition, and Diana praised it like he'd created something worthy of awards. The kids devoured most of the pan before demanding ice cream for dessert. After dinner, Noah and Lily disappeared into Noah's room with promises to keep the volume reasonable. Connor and Diana migrated to the living room, and Diana settled onto the couch with a glass of wine Connor had bought specifically for tonight. Connor took the chair across from her, then reconsidered and moved to the couch,
leaving respectful distance between them. They talked about everything: Diana's company, Connor's workshop commissions, the kids' upcoming school year, whether they should plan a camping trip before summer ended. The conversation eventually wound down into comfortable silence. Diana set down her wine and moved closer, closing the distance Connor had left between them. "I never asked what Emily would have thought about this. About us." Connor thought about his wife, about her final weeks and the promises they'd made.
She made me promise, before she died, that I'd teach Noah to be someone who helps people who need it, that I wouldn't let grief make me bitter or closed off. He paused. I think she'd like that I kept that promise. And I think she'd like you. Diana's head came to rest on Connor's shoulder. Marcus taught me to fear strong men, to see power as something that would always be wielded against me. You taught me that strength can be gentle, that protection doesn't have to come with conditions. Connor's arm wrapped around Diana's shoulders, pulling her closer. I'm not sure I'm ready for her. Diana's finger against his lips stopped the words. I know. Me neither. But maybe we don't have to be ready. We just have to be willing to try. Connor thought about wood curing, about how some things needed time before they became unbreakable. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Diana's, close enough to share breath, but not yet kissing. The moment stretched between them until Lily's voice cut through from Noah's room, demanding someone settle a dispute about monopoly rules. Diana pulled back with a rueful smile, and Connor felt relief mixed with regret. They weren't quite there yet, but the path forward was becoming clearer. The kiss came 2 weeks later, on the Tuesday evening after the kids were asleep. Nothing dramatic, no grand gesture, just Connor walking Diana to her door after helping hang curtains in Lily's room, both of them lingering on the porch while moths circled the light and the harbor reflected stars. Diana's hand was in his, warm and familiar, and Connor realized he'd been standing there for 2 minutes just looking at her, memorizing the way summer had brought out freckles across her nose, the way she smiled when she caught him staring. You're thinking too much, Diana said softly. Occupational hazard. Measure twice, cut once. Diana laughed. Are you comparing kissing me to carpentry? Maybe. Connor felt heat creep up his neck. I'm not very good at this. At what? Being present with someone who wants to be here with you? Diana stepped closer. You're doing fine. She kissed him then, gentle and careful, a question instead of a demand. Connor responded in kind, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The kiss deepened slightly but remained tender, two people finding their way toward each other without rushing or forcing. When they pulled apart, Diana's eyes were bright. Same time next week? Connor smiled. I'll even attempt something more ambitious than lasagna. Diana's laugh followed her inside, and Connor walked the 2 streets home under streetlights that painted his shadow long across the pavement. He thought about Emily, about the promises he'd made and the ones he'd broken, and the new ones he was learning to keep. Back in his apartment, Noah was still awake despite the late hour, reading by flashlight under his covers. Connor sat on the edge of his bed, and Noah put down the book. Did you kiss Miss Diana? Connor blinked, surprised. What makes you think that? Noah's expression was knowing beyond his years. You've got that smile. The one from pictures of you and Mom before I was born. The happy one. Connor's throat tightened. Yeah, buddy. I kissed her. Is that okay with you? Noah considered for a moment. Mom told me once, before she got really sick, that she wanted you to be happy again. She said being sad forever wouldn't honor her memory. Living would. I think she'd want you to kiss Miss Diana if it makes you happy. Connor pulled Noah into a hug, marveling at his son's wisdom and hating that he'd had to grow up so fast. When did you get so smart?
Always been smart. You're just finally noticing. Noah's grin was pure mischief.
Does this mean Lily's going to be my sister? Slow down. We're taking things one step at a time. But eventually? Connor thought about the question honestly.
Maybe. If we're lucky and we don't mess it up and we remember that building something good takes time. But yeah, buddy. Maybe eventually. Noah settled back into his pillows, satisfied.
Good. Lily says I'm the best almost brother she's ever had.
She's the only almost sister you've ever had.
Still counts.
Connor turned off the light and headed to his own room, feeling lighter than he had in 5 years.
The path forward wasn't clear, the future wasn't certain, but for the first time since Emily's death, he could imagine one that included joy alongside the grief, new love alongside old memories. August arrived with heat that drove tourists to the beaches and locals to air-conditioned buildings. Marcus's appeal of his sentence was denied, confirming that he'd served the full 7 years, barring exceptional behavior.
Diana received the news with quiet satisfaction, not celebration, because vengeance wasn't the goal, but relief that Lily's safety was guaranteed for the foreseeable future. The Victorian was finished now, transformed from neglected shell into a home filled with light and laughter. Diana had chosen soft colors for the walls, had hung photographs of Lily at various ages, had created spaces that invited comfort rather than impressing visitors. The rocking chair Connor had built sat in Lily's room by the window, positioned to catch morning light. Connor's workshop had been repaired and upgraded, the insurance settlement covering the damage and allowing for improvements he'd been postponing for years. New electrical panel, modern lighting, refinished floors that made the space feel larger and more professional. The security system had been upgraded too, though Connor hoped he'd never need it for anything more threatening than package thieves.
Anna and Diana settled into a relationship that felt both new and comfortable, like breaking in a favorite pair of boots, slightly awkward at first, but quickly molding to fit. They had dinner together 3 nights a week, alternating between his apartment and her house. They took the kids on weekend adventures, hiking Mount Batty, exploring tidal pools, visiting the Maritime Museum in Bath. They talked about the future in abstract terms, both too cautious to make concrete plans, but willing to acknowledge that their lives were becoming intertwined in ways that would be difficult to untangle, even if they wanted to, which neither of them did. One Sunday in late August, all 4 of them drove to the old pier where Connor had learned to fish as a boy. The pier was weathered and worn, but still solid, maintained by the town as a historical landmark. Noah and Lily raced ahead, eager to see the seals that sometimes hauled out on the rocks. Anna and Diana walked more slowly, hands linked, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other beyond words. The harbor stretched out before them, boats bobbing gently on the incoming tide, gulls wheeling overhead calling to each other. Lily's voice carried back to them, bright with wonder.
Look! Baby seals! 3 of them!
Noah's enthusiastic explanation of seal biology followed, facts about diving depths and migration patterns delivered with the authority of someone who'd memorized every marine science book in the elementary school library. Diana squeezed Connor's hand.
Thank you.
For what?
For showing us that not all storms bring destruction. Sometimes they bring exactly what you need, even if you don't know you're looking. Connor thought about that night in January, about the desperate woman and frightened child who'd stumbled into his workshop, about the choices he'd made and the consequences that had followed,
About how lives could pivot on single moments, how saying yes instead of no could change everything. Some things can't be rushed, Connor said quietly. Trust, love, family, they're like good wood. They need time to cure before they become unbreakable.
Diana leaned into him, and Connor wrapped his arm around her shoulders as they watched their children point out wildlife and argue good-naturedly about seal facts. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but promising, filled with potential for joy alongside the inevitable challenges.
The sun was warm on their faces, the salt breeze carrying the scent of ocean and possibility. Behind them, the town hummed with late summer activity. Ahead, the children's laughter mixed with seal calls and the cry of gulls. And in the space between, Connor and Diana stood together, building something meant to last from the broken pieces of their pasts, one careful choice at a time.